Ashley Goodall, thank you so much for being on the podcast. It's nice to see you again.
It's great to see you again.
So first of all, I want to congratulate you. Your book, The Problem with Change, was just named by the Financial Times one of the best summer books of 2024. Congratulations.
It's very exciting, and I hope people will have a wonderful summer reading about the problem with change.
One of the things I appreciate about the book, honestly, is it reads very quickly. It's an easy read, and it makes a lot of sense because I think you cover a lot of things that we all are aware of, and we can all relate to it.
You know, it's interesting. The responses to the book have been that.
Yep.
I recognize this. This is the world we all live in. Thank you for giving us language for this. Thank you for describing it accurately. And I was thinking the other day, not one person has raised their hand and said you're wrong. Not one person has raised their hand and said that this is not what it's like.
Right.
So we've arrived at an understanding of the nature and texture of work today from a sort of management perspective, but also, I think, importantly, from a psychological perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not an entirely happy one. And the question really is, so what are we going to do about that?
Right. So what are we going to do about it?
Well, I mean, the argument of the book is that we should have less change and we should have more stability, and we should understand the difference between change and improvement. But I suppose the place to start is actually to start the journey by understanding the psychological costs to humans of constant change.
Right.
And, you know, we could talk at great length about that, but the Cliff Notes version is that constant change for a human creates uncertainty, a sense of diminished agency, a sense of unbelonging, a sense of displacement, a sense of loss of meaning, and that all of those things are important to humans in helping them do their jobs. So constant change inhibits performance.
Yep.
Is like a really important thing to start with. And it's there's a little sting in that, if you like, in that realization, because we have taught generations of executives and rewarded generations of executives for creating constant change in the name of performance.
Right.
And so the psychological reality of humans at work today is diametrically at odds with the intent of their leaders. Mm-hmm. And that would be a problem. And I suppose we could actually say that is in a nutshell, the problem with change.
And I'm coming here to Stern Strategy Group from an industry that is very constantly changing. I was in broadcasting before this, and there's the anxiety. You know, for 20 years, I went to work not knowing if that was going to be the day they changed the format. Maybe it's tomorrow. Maybe it's, you know, when the ratings come out. And it does take a toll on you. I've been here for 2 years, and, you know, it's hard to get out of that mindset, you know, realizing that was, it's not like that everywhere.
You know, there's a section in the book about the very famous experiments that Martin Seligman did in the 60s and 70s on learned helplessness. And it was a choice to put that in a book. It's hard stuff to read about.
Yep.
They take a bunch of lab animals and put them in situations they can't escape from, and then move them later to an unpleasant situation they can escape from, and the animals don't try because they've been taught that whatever they do, it doesn't have any effect. And in one way, it's a sort of stretch to say, okay, here we are in 2024. Have we really taught millions and millions of office workers that whatever they do, it's going to be miserable? It sounds far-fetched until you talk to people. Until you talk to people who say, you know, different versions of what you said. You live in uncertainty, and sooner or later you give up trying because you figure that, listen, if I really put my shoulder to the wheel on this thing, in 6 months' time, someone's going to have changed it anyway. Or if I really try hard here, it won't make any difference because my efforts don't lead to anything. Right. So I'm just going to hunker down and do what it takes to not get fired. Now, we have names for that today. thanks to TikTok and Insta. And the names are not learned helplessness. The names are quiet quitting
Yep.
and coffee badging and lazy girl jobs. And we've taglinified the psychological reality of it's just not worth it
Yep.
because nothing I do will make that much of a difference. I think if we could count the number of people at work in the world today who show up on a Monday morning going, nothing I do will make that much of a difference, we would be astonished and horrified.
Yeah, and I've always thought there are two kinds of bosses, really. There's the encouraging boss that you work hard, you go above and beyond because you know it'll be recognized. And then there's the boss where you really just do the minimum so you don't get in trouble. You do
There's
your
the boss,
job and
but then,
yep,
but then, beyond the boss, there's the organization.
yep. Hmm.
So I've seen people who's like, look, my boss is lovely. They're trying to protect me, but I can see that when the next big reorg comes down, or the next new strategy, or the next change of C-suite leadership team, or the next piece of technology, or the next management consultant, or the next office floor plan, or the next new policy, or the next new approval process, or whatever, I can see that my leader isn't going to be able to stop the tide on that. They're a lovely person.
Right.
I love working for them. But they're not going to be able to turn the ship.
And they might be feeling the same way.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I found really arresting when doing the research for the book was how far up in an organization that feeling goes.
Interesting.
And it seems to go roughly to one level below the C-suite.
Okay.
So you have
Yep.
vice presidents of large organizations who report to somebody in the C-suite going, I'm trying to protect my people from this stuff and I don't feel I can.
Yep, that makes sense. One of the things I really appreciate about your book and you as a person, you're very quotable. One of the things that really made an impression on me from the organizational standpoint, there might be the argument that, well, we can't stand still. But your argument is stability is not the same as standing still. Can you explain that a little?
Yeah, the word I would use for standing still is stasis.
Mm-hmm.
Stability, think of stability like somebody said an escalator, which is interesting. So an escalator going up, we want to go up. Up is generally good, but
Right.
you don't want to stand on an escalator that goes at 300 miles an hour and then 0 miles an hour. And then, by the way, veers off to the left because there's a big hole in the floor off to the left. So if you're on an escalator, you want the escalator to move in a stable fashion. The other metaphor that I found useful is to think of a plane in flight. The fastest way to get there is to be in stable flight.
Right.
If you're zigzagging all over the place and going up and down and left and right, and somebody in the cockpit is like, oh, let's have some change today in where the plane is going, that is not much fun if you're in the back.
Yes.
So there is a quality of movement in the world that is smooth and stable and gets you there faster. That's the sort of movement that we want in organizations, because if you look at the organizations who are doing the other sort of movement, the disruptive zigzag, rush around and then start over movement, you discover they're actually not getting anywhere.
Right.
Now, people are moving with great velocity, but they're moving in 52 directions, or they're moving in one direction for 3 months and then another direction for another 3 months and then another direction for another 3 months. So there is something about stability and stable movement towards something. And it reminds me of how the great innovators very often describe what they do in terms of the ability and space to focus on a really hard problem.
Mm-hmm.
If you think about an organization as, to a certain extent, a problem-solving entity, then what we want is to maximize the conditions that allow people to solve problems.
Sure. Yep.
And you don't typically solve problems on the zigzagging escalator or the plane that's veering across the sky.
Right.
You solve the problems when you don't have to worry.
Yep.
about whether your boss is going to be there tomorrow, or the budget's going to be there tomorrow, or the team's going to be there tomorrow, or someone's going to change the mission tomorrow.
Yep. Yep.
And this, you can look at many of the technologies, for example, that we have today, and they emerge from that sort of condition very often over years and years and years and years and years. So we sort of, along the way, in getting very enamored with change, we've lost touch with what innovation actually looks like for the most part.
Yep. Yep. Another quote that I really like, you say, if an organization doesn't work for the humans in it, it doesn't work. And you're coming from an HR background, and you also talk a lot about how HR needs to change, how we need to look at it differently. Can we put those together and kind of tackle the human aspect of organizations?
I mean, the human aspect is in a way very simple.
Mm-hmm.
If we all could, each individual person in the world could do all of the tasks in the world at all of the scale in the world, we wouldn't need organizations. So organizations, if you like, exist to address the fact that none of us has superpowers and none of us can do all of the things, and each of us is only one of us. So you have an organization because people are good at different things, but if I'm good at one thing and you're good at another thing and we can get together, then lo and behold, we can do a bunch of different things, and we can orchestrate that and we can scale that.
Yep.
And then if we find some more buddies, we can do some more different things, and we can have some more capabilities and some more ambitions, and we keep going, and sooner or later you have an organization.
Right.
The point of an organization, seen through that lens, is to create a platform for human contribution.
Mm-hmm.
So I can be part of doing something with others that I couldn't do alone. And that thing can be a technology or a medicine or, I don't know, a sport,
Mm-hmm.
or a piece of art, or whatever it is. That's what organizations are for. But if the organization stops Ashley from being Ashley, or inhibits Ashley from being Ashley, or inhibits Justin from being Justin, then where's the point? We've lost the point of all of that stuff.
Yep.
Now, to construct an organization conceptually from the humans in it up is actually not how we usually think of these things. We usually go, an organization is an economic entity that must make profit.
Mm-hmm.
And there are some that don't make profit and they're called not-for-profits, but we don't really include those in our thinking because that doesn't fit this model. Right. And by the way, there are organizations that are social as well, and they don't fit the model either. So We'll just ignore those and say those are some other different sort of beast. But mainly organizations exist to make profit. And so if it increases the profits, it's a good thing.
Right.
I would argue that to say an organization is about making profit is like saying a human is about respiring oxygen. It's a necessary condition, but there's a lot more that you could be about.
Right.
We don't live through life going, I respired oxygen really well today.
I had a good day. Yep.
Hallelujah. I breathed out a hell of a lot, and I breathed in some too, and there we go.
There you go.
We allow ourselves at a personal level to engage with the things that are more than us and that are the fullest expression of us.
Mm-hmm.
One of the ways we humans are trying to do that is by teaming together with others.
Right.
But very quickly we lose sight of what that teaming is at its core. And what it is at its core is a way of harnessing what I can do and what you can do into something that neither of us could do alone, but we can enjoy and offer to the world the benefits of doing it together.
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. And when it comes to that performance, I also want to talk about performance reviews. And so many people, millions of people, maybe twice a year, maybe 4 times a year, get that sit down with the boss, and they take out the paper and they got the 1 to 5 scale, or maybe the 1 to 10 scale. How can we make that process a little less intimidating or get rid of it altogether?
Well, I think what you need to do is get rid of it altogether.
Okay.
And it is interestingly connected to this idea of human performance, a platform for human performance, because the thing that no one ever said after or going into the performance review, the annual I'll get my score and you'll tell me my feedback,
Right.
is this will help me do my job this afternoon, won't it?
Right. Can't wait.
People don't feel like that. They feel like it's a
Mhm.
thing to be survived. So if you go into the science of the ratings, it's actually a little bit wonky, and our judgments of other people are predictably flawed.
Mhm.
And that's before we actually change somebody's judgments because they don't fit the required distribution of grades. And then you look at the role of feedback in helping people do better, and it's not linear. It's certainly not straightforward, and especially feedback on things that we think they did wrong. And then if it's feedback on things we think they did wrong that we've had to somewhat invent to justify the fact that somebody told us to give them a different rating because we'd run out of the rating we wanted to give them
Right.
because we're not following the rules and blah, blah, blah. This is not a performance tool. It's some sort of a wonky management tool, I think at its root, to address the worry that many organizations have that their middle managers are too easy on people, that middle managers are soft on people,
Mhm.
and that what we need is a tool to force the middle managers to speak truth. And
Okay.
so we'll invent a tool and tell the middle managers to go through it and inflict pain on people, and then performance will ensue. If you go and talk to people, the humans, about what would help them do better at their jobs, in other words, what would lift performance, they say things like attention
Mhm.
and trust and more transparent decision making from the bosses and a more predictable work environment. They say they'll come up with a list of stuff that seems enormously sensible and completely unsurprising and nothing whatsoever to do with usual performance management.
Right.
There's no point in this give you a grade thing where we talk about attention or trust or things we could do to help you improve. Instead, we tell you what score we've given you. So the easiest way to fix that is to just stop it.
Yep.
I've led the Just Stop It project at two large organizations, Cisco and Deloitte, and a couple of things happen really quickly. Number one, employees love it, and number two, performance goes up. Because if you replace it with frequent conversations
Yep.
driven by the team member with their team leader about what they're going to do in the next few days, hallelujah.
Yep.
Attention results, trust results, predictability, understanding of decision. All the things come from conversation. You asked a moment ago about how HR fits into all of this.
Yep.
HR people have grown up in the world that says there needs to be a performance system because the business doesn't trust the middle managers. No one ever says it like that, but I think
Right.
that's really what's going on.
Mhm.
So please roll out a performance system, and the HR people go and look at the software providers, and there aren't many for this sort of stuff at very large organizations, and they go, look, they've all got ratings, so we're going to do a ratings thing.
Right.
If HR learned to start not with the business but with the humans, then HR would ask the question, what do people need to thrive at work?
Yep.
And what do people need to get better at work? And HR would become an advocate for attention, for predictability, for psychological health,
Yep.
and for stability, and would argue for those things because they lead to performance. And we've sort of lost, again, another turn that we made without quite noticing, I think, is that HR exists for the most part to implement the things that the business wants.
Right.
And
Administratively.
it's not a full-throated counterbalance to people in the business who aren't experts in people stuff necessarily, who don't have degrees in psychology, who don't have, years and years of experience looking at how to help people be better at their jobs. Those folks say we need one of these. HR should go, actually, no, you tell me the outcomes you're after.
Right.
And the outcomes, by the way, are going to be increased human performance. So we sort of can start with that one. And let's tell you some ways that we could push towards that. And that might involve you leaders doing some things differently. Get rid of the performance management system and stop changing everything every 15 minutes because
Right.
it's really hard on everybody.
Yep. And I want to come back to the leadership aspect of it. So after reading your book, what is one thing that an executive can go back to the office tomorrow and say, we're going to start with this. We're changing this right now.
The big this is to focus most on teams.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
If you want to understand, so you said a moment ago, you might have a boss who's really good at looking after you, but that person is then at the whim of changes up the
Mm-hmm.
organization chain. If you want to understand where stability and belonging and predictability and attention and certainty and place and meaning live in an organization, they live on teams if they live at all.
Okay.
So the first job of an executive is actually, and by the way, an executive in 1,000-person organization, 10,000-person organization can't directly affect the environment in the teams every day.
Sure.
So actually the first to do for a senior person is to recognize that you can undo a lot of this stuff, but you can't directly make it. So what you need to do is to lead your organization to get very, very curious about teams, to start figuring out the difference between the good ones and the bad ones, to start figuring out the difference between the good team leaders and the bad team leaders,
Mm-hmm.
and to figure out how to get more teams like your best teams. That's the go do, and it's not a go back and start doing that. Well, you can start tomorrow, but you're not going to finish tomorrow.
Right.
There's all sorts of research out there. It doesn't seem to land particularly strongly in organizations at the moment. Of course, if somebody reads the book and they're about to press play on some sort of reorg that will reshuffle all of the teams, maybe like not do that would be an idea. But get really serious about teams. If you ask people about their best and most productive experience at work, most people will start a sentence with, "Well, I was on this team and."
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Our career highlights are most often lived in the company of others.
Right.
We learn our teams over time. We learn what the other people are like. We learn when to lean on them and when they should ask for our help. We learn about the rituals. We learn about the team lore, LORE. We learn
Mm-hmm.
about the stories of the time when this happened and this happened and this happened. And yet, when change comes along, one of the first things that we do is we upend all the teams.
Right. Yeah.
So the missive to a senior executive reading the book is get really curious about teams, because if your organization thrives in its teams, it can thrive. And if it does not thrive in its teams, it cannot thrive.
You're making my job very easy, because I usually, before we put these podcast episodes out, I'll pull out some clips that we're going to promote on social media. And I appreciate it. You're making it easy to, grab those good 30, 60-second pieces of wisdom. And also, I want to talk about the New York Times op-ed that you wrote around the time of the book release. It's a great starting point, I think, for people to really get an idea of what you cover in the book. How did that kind of come about? It's a great piece.
We were thinking about how to condense a 75,000 word book into 1,200 words.
Mm-hmm.
And I can share a few things about that experience. A, it's massively hard, and B, I only want to do it every 3 or 4 years. Thanks very much.
Yes.
Because the experience of writing a book is to finally have space to construct arguments and to amass evidence and to arrive at conclusions and to connect thoughts together. And it's a canvas, it's a scale of canvas that I'm very happy on as a writer.
Sure.
And I think people who read the book will not say there are too many words, will not, for the most part, go, this goes on too long, but will go, it has form.
Yep.
It has flow, it has cadence, it has rhythm. And it's 75,000 words long-ish. 1,200 words is a very different beast.
Yeah.
And if you're writing the 1,200 words after having written 75,000 words, it feels like there's a lot that you're not saying.
Sure. You got to pick
And
your
so
favorite
you have to,
child. Yeah.
yeah, you have to sort of understand what the essence of your argument is and how to not lose things in the summary of it. There are many sort of executive summaries, they're called at work,
Sure.
in life, that are weirdly unmoving because somehow in distilling something down to its main conclusions, the conclusions sort of come from nowhere, or
Right.
you're not quite sure how they were arrived at, or they lack force,
Yep.
which is a funny thing at work because we spend a lot of time summarizing things for other people. So, how do you preserve the force of an argument while reducing the argument? And what we decided to do was to keep the stories
Mm-hmm.
and to keep the urgency and to keep the clarity of what we were trying to say. But I think it was keeping the stories in and allowing ourselves a little room to tell in a paragraph rather than 15 pages
Right.
the stories of people at work. And it worked, and the Times liked it. And um, you don't, when you write for a newspaper, you don't control the headline,
Right.
but they liked Blender, so
Yeah.
we got Life in the Blender
Yep.
in the headline. And the thing I learned about that process was that naming things for people is a powerful and helpful act.
Sure. Yep.
And so we've now given the world this name, Life in the Blender or Life in the Corporate Blender or whatever variant of it somebody is looking at. And people have come to me and said, thanks for giving it a name.
Yeah.
So, recognizing the problem you have and being able to give it a name is the first step towards doing something about it, I think.
And I'll throw the plug in. Our listeners can easily find that if they go to your sternstrategy.com profile page. We've got it right there under your media section. Something that I really absolutely want to get to. So you trained as a music conductor at Oxford. And I really like the analogy of thinking about employees like musicians. You bring them together. It feels like magic. It feels great. What is that feeling like for you? Not just as a conductor, but as a leader. Like, how do you describe that when you realize suddenly everybody's clicking and you've got it, you figured it out? I know that's 5 questions in one.
It's like if you take flow
Mm-hmm.
and make it exponential.
Okay.
So that's a very abstract answer. But, there's this quality that, again, is well understood in psychology called flow,
Yep.
where it comes from, by the way, doing something that you're good at that's slightly hard.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't come from easy things. It comes from having a little bit of resistance. But at some point, you can break through and you're in this flow state where you don't notice time going by and everything seems clear.
Yep.
Not effortless, but you know where you're going and you can do it. It's usually described as an individual state, if you like, but it can exist as a collective state.
Sure.
And that's the closest I can get to describing the feeling of being on a team where everybody knows their role and everybody, and there's a wordlessness to it. You don't really have to communicate much about what's going to happen next because people can just get on with it. The experience as a leader is one of being untethered.
Okay.
Because you don't have to worry that Joe is going to do this next because you know that Joe is going to do this next. And you don't have to worry that Mary will take over from Joe when it's her because Mary's it's so when you get to that point with a leader, the feeling is I can lift my eyes and look ahead to the next thing. I can start looking at what's around the corner. I can spend more of my time thinking ahead because the collective performance and playing together
Yep.
is there.
Yeah, it's got to be an amazing feeling thinking about standing in front of an orchestra or a band or a chorus and realizing that moment after weeks of rehearsal, however long, that this is it. This is the one where they all figured it out together.
It's also terrifying,
Sure.
just to say, because it is the most acute version I have experienced in my life of the realization that the thing that's about to happen depends on other people.
Okay. Sure.
So
Yep.
if you want to talk about trust,
Mm-hmm.
yes, we've practiced and we've done the rehearsals and all of this stuff, but I have no way of knowing for sure that when I give the first downbeat, anything's going to happen when I get
Right.
to the bottom.
Yep.
Will a sound emerge or not? And one of the quantities that seems to be leaching out of the workplace again, certainly since we emerged from the pandemic, is trust.
Yeah. Yep.
We
Yep.
we seem much less comfortable that other people will do the things that we thought they were going to do, or that leaders will do the things, or that leaders will be empowered to even do the things they said they were going to do. So we're living, again, we're living in a low trust environment. The first thing you learn as a musician is what you're really learning is what trust feels like,
Sure. Yep.
and what mutual trust feels like. Because if if we went to a symphony concert and the orchestra came on stage and somebody said, you know what, never mind the violins and never mind the brass and never mind the percussion and never mind the flute and never mind the clarinet and never mind the bassoon, we're going to have the oboe play their part in the symphony and we're all going to sit here and listen for an hour, it would be nonsense. For a start, there'd be lots of silence while they're counting breasts, and then they'd play the alto note of a chord, and then they'd go, and you go, but this is not it.
Right.
We need all of the parts. But if you're in the orchestra, you've got to trust the oboe will do their part, and the oboe's got to trust that you will do your part.
Right.
And that sounds sort of simplistic. But actually, there's a lot of work where that trust is been broken.
Sure.
It's a new team. I don't, not because people have ill will, but because again, we're shaking stuff up the whole time, and that trust takes a little time to build. It's the skeleton of human collaboration with other humans is built gradually. It's a super precious thing. But you don't get it in one team building session with a bunch of trustfuls.
Right.
That's not where it comes from. You don't get it really at Outward Bound. You get it from working together over time. And it's a super precious thing. It's the most valuable thing that organizations have. And it is the thing that they value least very often, to judge by their actions.
And that is a perfect way to bring it all back to that problem with change theme. One thing that I like to do a quick lightning round. 3 questions I did not prep you on. Just your gut reaction.
Yes.
Do you have a favorite podcast besides this one, of course?
I am a long-term addict of Malcolm Gladwell's Revisionist History
Excellent
podcast,
Yep.
because that man's storytelling is just supremely wonderful. And I think Malcolm could narrate to me a cup of tea getting cooler over the course of an hour, and I would find it riveting.
Yep.
So that's my favorite podcast.
Okay. We might have covered this. In an alternate universe, what would you be doing for a living?
Oh, I'd be conducting a symphony orchestra.
Okay. Okay, so imagine you're halfway to work. What is the one item that would make you turn around and go back for it?
Well, I've been working from home for a little while now because of pandemic and because I was a remote executive at Cisco. And so halfway to work is halfway up the stairs
Sure.
to my home office, just to be completely clear about it. So the thing that makes me turn around is I've forgotten to bring the cup of coffee upstairs.
Fair. And I think there are a lot of people that if they didn't get their, their tumbler of coffee and their Stanley cup, they'd go back and get it.
There you go. There you go.
Ashley, I can't thank you enough for your time. If people want to read more about you, again, besides sternstrategy.com, where else are you on social media and on the internet?
So most of my stuff is at ashleygoodall.com, and I post as frequently as I can muster on LinkedIn. So those are two good places to find out more.